deep into this double pay issue, and he answered a lot of stuff. He stood in, he took the shots, but at the end of the day, he said that he was going to punt it off to you. So I guess we'd start with that.
Right. I know that Senator Joe St. Augustine, he had written you a letter regarding the double pay issue and wanting an explanation as to why the double pay was not being paid out.
Yes, and I wrote back to him, I think he got the letter yesterday, explaining all the conditions.
Okay, well, I haven't received the letter. Can you explain it to us why? Because John Jr. said it was not going to be paid.
No, it's not going to be paid. I'll quote from the letter, if I may, and tell me if I'm going too fast, and I'll try and slow down, right?
Okay.
The governor signed Executive Order 2020-03 in March 14, 2020, and declared a public health emergency. As a result of this executive order, non-essential government operations were suspended, and certain agencies which perform essential operations were required to designate and required to report to those employees whose job duties covered tasks directly or indirectly associated with minimizing the damage caused to the population of Guam by the virus. Those employees whose job duties involved non-essential activities were required to remain at home. You recall that executive order, right?
Mm-hmm.
This second group was not placed on administrative leave with pay, as was said in his letter. They were to remain on duty during normal working hours, ready to report to work at 2 hours' notice. And I don't know about every agency, but we've certainly exercised that option at Department of Administration and brought people in to do something where we felt it was necessary. And if their duties permitted, or if appropriate arrangements were made, they were required to work from home. Since they were on duty, they were and are being paid regular pay at regular rates. Rule 8.406C2 states, and I added an emphasis, and I'll indicate where the emphasis was, those employees required to remain on duty to provide essential services shall be paid double the regular rate or granted compensatory leave credits for hours worked during the period the facility is closed and the other employees are on excused leave. As you may see from the comments above, the facilities at which essential workers were carrying out the duties were not closed, neither were the other employees on excused leave. The Department of Administration concluded that Rule 8.406C2 did not apply in the circumstances which we're currently experiencing. And the letter goes on to talk about the financial resources that would be committed were we to pay that double rate.
And what's that?
Could you go back to that 8.4? You said 8.406.
Yes, that's what the senator quoted in his letter.
And it does not apply. That's what you're saying.
It does not apply in these circumstances because those conditions are different from the conditions set forth in that rule.
What were the conditions that were set in that rule?
During the period, this is the emphasis, during the period the facility is closed and the other employees are on excused leave. So, I mean, the whole point of having everybody on regular duty is that whenever something needed to be done, as I say, this certainly was the practice of the Department of Administration, we brought people in to perform those duties. And if the duty was complete, then they were permitted to go home. If the duty was not complete, they had to stay at the facility to complete those duties.
Okay, so I'd have to see a copy of this letter.
What about
really
overtime,
but
Mr. Birn? How are we doing with overtime during this pandemic emergency declaration?
Do you mean are people working overtime?
Yeah. And how much?
Well,
we
yes,
got any figures?
There are some people working overtime, but you recall the executive order required payment of overtime to non-exempt employees, and the the overtime had to be approved by BBMR, and we have had and paid for some of those overtime claims.
Which agencies are we seeing? Is it just the typical, public safety agencies?
Yes, I think it was mainly Homeland Security who did most of the overtime. But I think there's been some going on, naturally at Public Health. But I don't think they habitually work overtime.
Right.
Because they're in my office, a lot of them, and I see them working not extraordinary hours. Although there are some times when I have seen them work beyond regular working hours.
And then, so I know we're talking about the double pay, but the governor's executive order with that sliding scale and the COVID differential pay, has that been paid out yet?
We're paying it out on Friday. We got all the timesheets in for the 2 weeks. You recall the emergency started, I think it was March 14th, but the executive order can't be retrospective. So we're paying out 2 pay periods. Well, I'm sorry, I should say 2 weeks. It's 2 pay periods of 2 weeks each on Friday, based on the information which we're receiving from agencies. And they were due to send in timesheets on Friday. There was still some outstanding yesterday, but we were chasing them up.
How much money are we looking at paying out in COVID differential hazard sliding scale pay?
Well, we don't know yet until we get it in. But I'm thinking just an estimate, and when I get the report, which I'll get tomorrow, and I'll be happy to share it with you tomorrow. I'm thinking around about 900,000 for a pay period of 2 weeks.
Is this retroactive or
No. This is from the date of the differential pay was authorized by the executive order.
May 5th?
So
or wait, no.
No.
It's
It's April 10th. April 10th.
April 10th.
And it's not going to be retroactive, right? Prior to
that was the subject. If you recall, that was the subject. There was a bill in the legislature to make it retrospective, and that got expanded into other areas.
Right.
And for that reason, the governor vetoed the bill and submitted a bill to simplify the whole thing into authorizing the retrospective payment. But I don't believe the legislature has acted on that as of yet.
And so this is Category 1, 25% pay differential to essential employees, right?
Yes.
Okay. In the course of their duties who are in direct contact or in close physical proximity to a population infected with COVID-19. Then Category 2 is the 15%, and Category 1 is the 10%.
So
this go ahead.
Category 3 is 10%.
Right. So we had asked John Jr. Calvo, and maybe you know a little bit more about the application of these different sliding scales, but the question we had posed was, would employees like Alice Tyron or Rebecca Respicio, who are staffing the Pacific Star Quarantine Hotel, would they get the same amount of COVID differential pay as, let's say, a medic with Guam Fire who's transporting PUIs, or someone at GMH who's taking care of COVID positive patients, or someone at Public Health who's swabbing for community testing?
Well, I'm not familiar with exactly what they're doing, but if they experience a similar type of exposure, then, if you recall, cabinet members are entitled to Category 1 or Category 2 pay, but not Category 3 pay. So I honestly don't know what they're doing, because, as I say, we're getting all these timesheets in. I will take a look at their timesheets when it comes in, and if they're reporting that they had a similar exposure, they would get the Category K in the appropriate category.
Just for clarification, so the governor signed another executive order to allow for cabinet members to be eligible for this COVID-19 response differential pay.
It was included in the executive order.
Right.
And in the initial one.
They were only entitled to differential pay in categories 1 and 2, but not in 3.
And 3 is
Category 3 is a 10%.
Yes.
Oh.
So they're eligible for the higher
right.
differential pay.
Obviously, if their exposure so warrants. Right. So,
right.
For me, I don't have the exposure, so I would normally be in the 10% category, but because I am, I don't get any any differential
I
pay.
see. I see. So who makes the final determination? So if, let's say, Alice and Becky send in their timesheet to you, and they say, we got towels for a guy who stays down the hall from a guy who's COVID positive or whatever. I mean, is that your call to look at it and say, yeah, you're going to get 25%? Or, I mean, whose calls is the onus on the person who submits the timesheet and the request?
Yeah, I mean, that would be true, Chris, of any timesheet. Is the primary responsibility of an employee is to report their time accurately to their supervisor.
But they don't get a timesheet because they're on salary. They're unclassified, right?
No, but we do have. I have a timesheet.
Okay.
And these duties are being reported on special timesheets that we're using to aggregate the differential pay. Ultimately, cabinet members' time. My timesheet is authorized by the chief of staff, or in this case.
So, in your opinion, if a director of a government agency works at let's say a government of Guam quarantine/isolation facility where there are people who are COVID-19 positive, do you think that working in that facility allows them to receive the highest or the second highest COVID differential pay?
Yes, I mean, if they're exposed to people, I think there's a difference between an isolation facility and a quarantine facility. Because isolation is people who haven't tested positive.
Right.
But quarantine is people that have tested positive. And were they in that category? Yes, they would be entitled to it. That's the whole purpose of the differential pay.
Right. So what if they're just manning a quarantine facility that doesn't have the isolation component with the COVID-19 positive patients?
Well, that would depend on the circumstances. I would have to look and see, were there any positive people that subsequently tested positive in that, because when you go in, you could test negative, and sometime and that's the point of isolation, right? Sometime during that isolation period, you could test positive. So I'd have to look at all those circumstances.
Right.
And obviously, in this case, because of the info that you're showing, I will look into it when I've got all the information.
Right.
Are you going to be getting Category 1 or Category 2 COVID-19 response differential pay?
Am I?
Yeah.
No. No, I just said. I just said that I would normally be in Category 3, and Category 3 is it does not qualify.
Right. Yeah.
Whose positions do not allow them to telework.
So basically, Mr. Birn is working during the pandemic, but he's not coming into contact, not being exposed to COVID-19 positive patients. So you would normally qualify for the bottom tier of the sliding scale, but the governor's executive order exempts cabinet from qualifying for that. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's absolutely correct. Yes, and that's I'm talking to you sitting in my car, so I can talk to you without my mask on, so that you can hear me.
Oh,
Can I ask you if this new COVID-19 response differential pay policy, if it was not enacted through executive order, or if this didn't even, we just came up with this plan, if we didn't have this, would people that were eligible for differential pay, the double pay, would they have paid the double pay?
Well, it's circumstances rather than the differential that led the Department of Administration to conclude that they shouldn't get double pay. The governor felt, and that seems to be reasonable, that people that have an exposure should be permitted and rewarded for submitting themselves to that exposure. But as I said right at the very beginning, none of the circumstances entitle them to double pay. So this scheme of differential pay, which was meant to respond to the differing risk to those employees, was devised and implemented.
What about
But
Homeland?
if the government is shut down, isn't it only essential employees supposed to be working? And hence they would be eligible for the double pay?
No, but as I said at the very beginning, the circumstances of that 8.406 just don't apply, so that rule doesn't apply. So we had to devise some other way of rewarding the government workers that are working
Right.
for the risk that they're taking.
What about Homeland Security personnel? Do they get the sliding differential? Would it be maybe the third tier?
Well, again, it depends upon what they're doing, and I'm sure some are involved in dealing. You know, one of the questions I'm going to have to deal with is the bus drivers that take people from the airport to the quarantine facilities. Are they exposed and aren't they exposed? And that's a matter of fact and circumstance. And we'd have to look at everybody that worked, even at Homeland Security.
Right. And then, Mr. Birn, there was a comment here, and I'm going to send a FOIA. I think I did send one. Will this be public knowledge as to who did what and got what category pay?
All government remuneration and compensation is published, and yes, it will.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So it's up to the directors to determine who gets category 1, category 2, category 3?
Well, the
I'm just
directors
kind
know
of-
better best what's going on in their own agencies.
Right, but they're the ones who decide.
Yes.
Okay. And so this 8.406, this is the natural disasters and emergency conditions. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You know, I can see that is necessary in there would be another unfortunate circumstance, but in a short, sharp incident like a typhoon, where we do close down all the government offices. But the very people that the senator's letter said should be paid this double pay are the very people that are working in the agencies that are operating. So it's a contradiction of that rule.
Is there a specific law
But aren't
that...
they working because they're essential?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's what they're doing. But the facility isn't closed. The facility is open. They're not out. Some of them are out doing things, but some of them are working in the facility, which for an essential service is open. And the Department of Administration has some essential services going on, and we've remained open so that people could get paid and vendors could get paid.
What about nurses who work for public health who report to DAZN or PACSTAR? Are they reporting for regular work? And then also, Mr. Birn, is there a specific law that authorizes the executive order for COVID differential?
No, there's no law. It's an executive order.
Right.
So you wouldn't need an executive order if there's a law. I honestly, because I don't know about those nurses. I would have to look at the specific timesheets. And the nurses are coming from many agencies. They're coming from public health. They're coming from GCC. They're coming from
GDOE, UOG, right? Yeah.
And UOG, and some from GRMC. So I really couldn't tell you. But when we get all this information together, I think we'll be able to dissect it to your satisfaction.
Right.
Did
Thank you.
Did you get a legal opinion on this whole double pay issue?
I haven't got a legal opinion. No.
That was just based on your interpretation of... Okay.
Yes, but a copy of the letter went to the Attorney General, but I haven't heard anything in response to it.
Okay. I was just wondering if the decision based on we're not going to pay out the double pay because of Section 8.406 doesn't apply here, was based on any sort of legal advice.
I mean, it's kind of a...
Because GFT has indicated that, there's a possibility that this will go
to court.
To court.
Yeah.
I'm sure, of course.
Yeah.
And what I suspect that whatever we did, it would go to court in some fashion, since that's, the ultimate place for testing these rules and laws.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's the purpose of courts, right?
Yeah. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
And I kind of just wanted to know if there was any sort of legal advice provided. So, because
But
we
if-
have
Yeah.
somebody providing all kinds of legal advice in what we're doing today.
Right.
Well, yes, and we get legal advice from lawyers, non-lawyers. With
No shortage of legal
I
advice,
think
Mr. Birn.
there's
Yeah.
no shortage of advice and opinions around.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I assure you, we take notice of them all.
Someone wanted me to ask if you're related to that lady from Guam Business Journal.
No.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge.
Right.
No. I don't think honestly, I don't think I'm related to anybody here.
Okay.
Of all the people that I could have married, I couldn't find someone further away from being related to, I don't think.
If I talk like this, can we be related?
Yeah. Can we get information if we talk like this?
Well, I'd have to see how you held your teacup.
Pinky up, I guess. All right, Mr. Birn. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you so much.
Yeah.
Have a
Thanks,
great
keep
day.
safe and have a good day.
Yeah, and wash
You
your
too.
hands. Okay.
I'm going to. Thanks.
Okay. 8:27. Let's do a deep dive
Oh.
into the day's COVID-19 headlines. We also have Lester Carlson